What would you do if you learned that your perfect neighbor, the apple of everyone's eye, was actually hiding something so disturbing that it would change your entire neighborhood forever? That's exactly what happened to Mike Thompson when he moved to Maple Street in Columbus, Ohio. That March day when Mike Thompson received the keys to his new home on Maple Street, he thought it would be the start of the best season of his life. Moving from his Detroit corporate apartment building to the peaceful suburbs of Ohio with his wife, Sarah, and 8-year-old son, Tommy, was a long-held dream for the family. Tree-lined streets, houses with white picket fences, and a safe place for children to play outside, exactly what they were looking for. On the first day of the move, Mike was unloading his belongings from the truck when he met his neighbor across the street, David Miller. David was in his early 40s, always smiling and clean-cut. He was about 6 feet tall, his brown hair neatly combed, and his blue eyes always sparkled with a warm glow. "Welcome to Maple Street," David said, extending his hand. "Anything you need around here, you can call me." And indeed, he had kept his promise. During that first week, David was like an angel. He helped Mike carry the heavy sofa set, showed Sarah the nearest supermarket, and even told Tommy the safest ways to bike around the neighborhood. Every morning, he'd wave a friendly wave as he gardened, and in the evenings, he'd be heard working in his garage, listening to music. "David is truly a gem," their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, said a week later. "He's been like the neighborhood's spiritual leader since he moved here 6 years ago. When my husband had a heart attack last year, we were able to survive thanks to him. Hospital visits, shopping, lawn mowing, he handled everything." Every day, Mike heard new examples of David's excellence. Fixing old Mr. Henderson's roof, finding little Emma Walsh the day she disappeared, getting everyone's cars out in a snowstorm, the list was endless. "This guy is too perfect to be true," Mike joked to Sarah one evening. "Maybe he's just a good person," Sarah said. "It's nice to see there are still people like him in the world." But Mike's observant nature had begun to notice the little details that bothered him. David's house was the most well-kept in the neighborhood, the lawn was always perfectly cut, the flowers regularly watered, the paint fresh. But there was something odd about the garage. The large double-door garage door never opened. David always parked on the street and only left with various hand tools. By the end of the first month, Mike had noticed something else. No one was entering David's house. The neighborhood always complimented him with things like, "We talked in David's yard," or "David helped us with the porch." No one ever said, "We had coffee at David's house," or "We sat in David's living room." "Is that normal?" Mike had asked Mrs. Rodriguez. "Oh, David's a very private person about his house," she had said. "I guess he doesn't like mess. But that doesn't change how kind he is, does it?" Mike tried to rationalize this explanation, but he couldn't quite get his bearings. David was truly perfect, too perfect. And this perfection made Mike uneasy. During the second month, Mike began to observe David more closely. Every morning at 6, he would leave the garage and spend about an hour gardening. In the afternoon, he usually worked in his small workshop behind his house and spent time in the garage again after dinner. He never had friends over, never went out. "Does David have a family?" Mike had asked Mr. Henderson one day. "He was never married," the old man had said. "He always lived alone. Sometimes I get upset about that, but he never complains. He seems happy to be alone." One Saturday evening, as Mike was putting Tommy to bed, he realized he could see David's garage through his son's window. Light was streaming in from under the garage door, and strange noises were coming from inside, metal on metal, the occasional grinding sound, then silence. "Dad, what's Mr. David doing there?" Tommy had asked. "I think he's just doing a hobby project, son," Mike said, but something inside him told him that explanation wasn't enough. From that night on, Mike began tracking David's activities in the garage. Every night, he worked in the garage between 9 and 11. The sounds were always the same, metalworking noises, power tools, the occasional heavy drop. At the beginning of the third month, Mike dared to ask David directly, "David, what kind of hobbies do you do in the garage?" David's face contorted for a moment, then his normal smile returned. "Oh, I just fix old electronics. The neighbors' broken TVs and radios. Better to fix things than throw them away, right?" The explanation made sense, but Mike had questions. He'd never seen anyone in the neighborhood take electronics to David. Things started to get strange in May. One night, when Mike went down to the kitchen for a drink of water, feeling sleepy, he saw someone walking through David's backyard with a flashlight. It was 2 a.m. David's silhouette was moving toward the small wooded area in the backyard, carrying a large duffel bag. Mike watched curiously. David returned about 20 minutes later, but this time without the bag. He went straight into his garage and turned off the lights. "This isn't normal," Mike muttered to himself. The next morning, Mike decided to take a walk in the direction David had gone. There was a small wooded area behind Maple Street, designated as a protected natural area by the city's planning. Mike tried to find the path David had followed as he walked through the woods. After about 15 minutes of walking, Mike noticed something odd. The ground at the base of a large oak tree looked freshly dug. As he got closer, he found something hard beneath the ground. He scraped a little with his hand, finding the corner of a plastic bag. His heart began to race. He looked around, no one was there. Digging further, he saw the plastic bag filled with broken electronic parts. Pieces of old television screens, radio parts, various circuit boards. So he actually fixes electronics, Mike thought, but something bothered him. These parts weren't just broken electronics, they looked burnt, corroded by acid or chemicals. As he drove home, Mike ran through scenarios in his head. Maybe David was disposing of electronic waste using special methods to protect the environment. Maybe he was disposing of it illegally. That evening, Mike decided to keep a closer eye on David. At 9 o'clock, he watched David's garage, pretending to work in his garden. As usual, David was working in the garage, but this time, Mike listened more closely. The sound of metal cutting, then an electric drill, then the sound of liquid pouring. Then a strong chemical smell drifted on the wind to Mike's nose. A familiar scent, but he couldn't place it. After midnight, David went out into the backyard again. This time, Mike decided to follow him more closely. He quietly left his backyard and followed David. David followed the same path back to the woods. Mike followed at a safe distance. This time, David went to a different spot. He had dug a larger hole. He was dumping large plastic bags into it. When the smell from the bags reached Mike's nose, he felt nauseated. A bitter, burning chemical smell. When David was finished, he covered the hole with soil and returned. Mike waited a few minutes, then approached the hole. The soil had been freshly filled, but the smell still lingered in the air. This time, Mike recognized the smell, acid. A strong acidic smell. As Mike returned home, his mind was reeling. Why was David disposing of so much electronic waste with acid? And why was he doing it secretly? The next day, Mike decided to do some research online. When he searched electronic waste disposal methods, he learned that normal procedures didn't involve the use of acid. More importantly, disposing of electronic waste at home was illegal in Ohio. Maybe David just doesn't know the law, Mike thought, but something was still wrong. That evening, Mike decided to confide in Sarah. "Honey, I'm a little nervous about David," he said. "Why?" "He's a very good neighbor," Sarah said. Mike recounted his nightly observations. Sarah was initially skeptical, but when she saw Mike's seriousness, she began to worry. "Maybe he's just illegally dumping waste," Sarah said. "It's not a major crime. But why does he do it so secretively? And why doesn't he ever let anyone in?" Sarah thought for a long time. "Maybe you should try visiting David's house once. Like doing your neighborly duty." Mike found the idea plausible. The next day, He'd go to David's house and ask if he'd like to have coffee. Saturday morning, Mike knocked on David's door. When David opened the door, he had his usual smile, but a slight nervousness in his eyes caught Mike's attention. "Hey Mike. How are you?" "I'm fine, David. Sarah made some coffee. Do you want to come over and chat for a bit?" David's face tightened for a moment. "Oh, you're very kind, but my house is a little messy right now. Maybe some other time." "No problem, my house is always messy too," Mike said with a laugh. "Or we could stay at yours." "No." David's voice was harsher than usual. Then he softened quickly. I'm doing housework right now. Is it some other time?" Mike didn't press him, but David's reaction made him even more suspicious. A normal person wouldn't be so nervous when their neighbor invited them over for coffee. That afternoon, Mike walked around his house while David was out. From the front, the house looked perfect, but in the back, the windows were covered with thick curtains. It was impossible to look in through any of the windows. As Mike approached the garage window, he heard a strange noise from inside. It wasn't a chainsaw, it was something else. The sound of metal cutting, but rhythmic, like something being torn apart. He dared to approach the window, but the glass was tinted, so the interior was invisible. He could only make out moving shadows. That evening, Mike made a firm decision. He had to find out what David was doing. Now, not only curiosity but also his family's fear had taken over. What if David was truly dangerous? Monday evening, Mike put his plan into action. He knew David routinely started working in the garage at 9 o'clock. At 8:30, Mike quietly crept out of his backyard and over to David's house. There was a small window at the back of the garage. When Mike climbed the ladder to the window, he finally saw what David was doing. What he saw shocked him. David was working at a large metal workbench. There were various electronic devices on the workbench, but these weren't your average television or radio. They were professional-looking equipment, metal cases, blinking lights. David was disassembling these devices with his specialized tools. He carefully examined each piece, placing some in a box and dropping others into a container filled with acid. When Mike tried to look closer, he realized what devices David was working with. Security cameras, listening devices, GPS trackers. These weren't your average electronic devices. Even more surprising, photos hung on a large wall next to David's counter. Pictures of local residents. Mike also saw a photo of his own family, Sarah shopping, Tommy going to school, himself going to work. Mike's blood ran cold. David wasn't just disposing of electronic waste. He was keeping an eye on everyone in the neighborhood. Mike carefully descended the stairs and ran into the house. His heart was beating so fast it was hard to breathe. "Sarah," he called out. "Sarah, we need to talk." Sarah saw Mike's excitement and became worried. What happened? Mike told her what he'd seen. Sarah didn't believe him at first, but Mike's detailed description began to frighten her. "So what do we do now?" Sarah asked. "We have to call the police," Mike said. But when Mike woke up the next morning, he noticed something strange. David's house was empty. His car was gone, and no one was in the yard. When Mike asked the neighbors, Mr. Henderson responded in surprise. David said he went on a sudden business trip last night. He didn't say when he'd be back. When Mike went to the police, the officers took the situation seriously and searched David's house. The garage had been cleared out, but some traces remained: acid residue, fragments of photographs, scrap electronic circuits. A police investigation revealed that David Miller's real name was Daniel Mason, and that he had been caught in similar activities in other states. He was a professional surveillance expert, illegally following people and collecting their personal information. The perfect neighbor, on Maple Street never returned. But the neighborhood had learned that even the most perfect-looking person could be hiding dark secrets. Mike Thompson realized that day, in real life, there are no perfect people. And if someone seems too perfect, they probably have something to hide. Maple Street was no longer the peaceful place it once was. Everyone was more wary of their neighbors, a little more suspicious. Because they now knew that sometimes the greatest danger can come from the most trustworthy person.